slide in here for that. I'm going to talk a little bit about the laws protecting cultural resources, and for the ambassadors, you guys are just sort of starting your career as public land managers, and so you'll see this a lot over your lives, but take a chance to at least give you a brief intro to this. And basically it's going to be the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966 is mostly what we'll talk about today. And then the big topic is what not to clean up, which, spoiler alert, it can pretty much be summed up: if it's rusty, use caution and just leave it there. If it's shiny, feel free to bag it and trash it. And then I'll touch a little bit on a brief history of Oak Creek Canyon. You guys probably know more about it than I do, or at least it's fresher in your heads. So cultural resource protection laws. People didn't really care about archaeology until about the last century. In the 1800s, a few people in Europe, classical archaeologists, Greece, different places in the world, were starting to think of archaeology the way we think of archaeology in terms of science. And at that point, these are basically naturalists who are running around interested in everything and anything, animals, plants, whatever. There were a few biblical scholars who were trying to prove or disprove the Bible in the Middle East, and so they were doing some early archaeological type work. But really this was basically just digging holes in cool sites and looking for stuff, which sounds like the best time to be an archaeologist to me. There wasn't much science, there wasn't much ethics, there wasn't much thought put into this at all. So the late 1800s, people are really starting to think about archaeology as a science. They're still not digging in stratigraphic levels, or they haven't really worked any science out, but they're realizing that this is a field of inquiry to study anthropology. So in the late 1800s, about the 1880s, people start to recognize sites in the American Southwest as being cool. I wouldn't go so far as to say important, but cool at this point, and interesting. And so all the big museums send out expeditions to collect artifacts. And so the Smithsonian, the Peabody, there's kind of an arms race to send out expeditions, and these expeditions were sending back wagon loads of pots out of the area that's now mostly the Navajo Reservation, the Four Corners area. Literally, 5, 6 wagon loads of pots would come out of a single site. And so once the scientists started collecting this stuff, the general public thought, hey, there's something to this, this must be valuable. So that was the birth of pot hunting and looting. And at that point it wasn't black market, but today sort of the things that sell on the black market, the gray market. And so sites started to get vacuumed up and looted pretty heavily. And so the American public realized they needed to start putting into place laws to protect these things. So the very first one we have is the Antiquities Act, and that was enacted in 1906. Today we look back on it and we think that it wasn't much, but at the time it was a whole lot, and it protected anything over 100 years old. Eventually in the 60s, I forget the name of the case and the date, but numerous convictions had been made over the years under the Antiquities Act. But a challenge in court came, and part of it was struck down. And so all of a sudden, it was in one of the circuit courts. I believe it was the 10th Circuit Court. I could be wrong on that. But it basically left the world or the country realizing that the Antiquities Act was going to fall. And so they put into place the National Historic Preservation Act in 1966. And this was sort of during the time of social revolution in the 60s. And so that's when we got NEPA. We got all of these laws to protect the environment and other resources. So what NHPA says, basically, is that the federal government has to consider the effects of its actions. We have to look at it scientifically, analyze it, disclose those, and then make an informed decision. It does not say that everything is protected. It doesn't say that every site is protected. It just says that we have to consider the effects, consult with the tribes, consult with the SHPO's office, the State Historic Preservation Office. If there's disputes, we may have to consult with the National Advisory Council. So we have to talk to a lot of people. But once we've done that, then we can move ahead. And so there are times when federal agencies make decisions that tribes or other groups disagree with, and we still comply with the NHPA. And the next layer, that if you're around the Forest Service much at least, you'll hear a lot of talk about the PA. That's the Programmatic Agreement. That's an agreement between mainly Arizona and New Mexico, but it's also, it's Region 3 forests, and so it includes a little bit of Oklahoma, a little bit of Texas. And we've come to an agreement with the SHPOs of each of those states. Each state has their own SHPO. And we've come to an agreement of how we're going to do to comply with the National Historic Preservation Act. And specifically, Section 106 of the NHPA is what guides us when we're doing federal undertakings. So the PA gives us some streamlined processes that we can use to work through NHPA. So the PA doesn't replace and it doesn't shortcut. It just gives us a streamlined process to comply with the NHPA. So next slide. So what the NHPA says, it says a whole lot of stuff, but the things that I think might be relevant today, and at least to start you thinking about this, is that we have to protect sites listed or eligible on the National Register of Historic Places. And again, that doesn't mean we have to protect every site from every kind of damage, but we have to make this effort. And sites can be listed on the National Register under 4 different criteria. One is associated with significant events. And so for instance, in Oak Creek Canyon, Jim Thompson, the first homesteader, built a couple of wagon roads. The first one he built was up Oak Creek Canyon, basically followed the bottom of the creek. It's pretty much washed out. We don't know exactly where it was. If there's any pieces remaining, they wouldn't be more than a few feet long. It's pretty much gone. So that one would not be eligible for reasons we'll talk about in a minute. But his road that he started in about 1887, that was in use until 1929, that was the first good, solid, negotiable wagon road into the canyon. And that's what was built upon going up the canyon, eventually connecting to Flag, and eventually turned into the highway. It's been rerouted, of course. But that was the seed that opened up Oak Creek Canyon to homesteading, to the orchards. It was a significant event at the community level, at the state level, and arguably at the national level for the development of Sedona. So that would make it eligible for the National Register. Criteria B is associated with important time in the life of a significant person. So maybe J.J. Thompson Homestead isn't the best example of that. What I was really going for is just because a famous person is associated doesn't mean it qualifies for B. So Zane Grey. Everyone says, oh, well, Call of the Canyon is important because Zane Grey was there. Well, no, that doesn't make it significantly eligible. He did not write Call of the Canyon there. He didn't do anything of import nationally while he was in Oak Creek Canyon. He hunted and he relaxed, and maybe that helped him think. But we can't tie any event, no treaty he didn't sign any treaties, or he didn't do anything great while there. So just because he's famous and Call of the Canyon's famous doesn't mean that Call of the Canyon is eligible because of Zane Grey. Next slide. C means distinctive characteristic of type, period, method, construction, representation of a master, possess a high artistic value. So if it's super fantastic, it gets to be on. So Chapel of the Holy Cross. It's a great example of a particular type of architecture, not of, but under the Frank Lloyd Wright School, and so it's on under C. Midgley Bridge is a unique architectural engineering type, and so it's on under C. And then mostly what we talk about is D, and that's what we're mostly going to be concerned about for you guys, which is have yielded or likely to yield important information in history. So that's really archaeology. When we think of archaeology, that's what we're talking about. That's artifacts, that's stuff buried in the ground. That's the little clues to the puzzle that we piece together to build a picture of what happened in the past. And so that's why we don't want to bag and tag any of the artifacts is because it takes away from this story and takes away from the eligibility. So next slide. And then we talk about historic properties, and what a historic property can be under NHPA is a district, a site, a building, a structure, or even an object that possesses integrity of location, design, setting, materials, workmanship, feeling, and association. And so as we start whittling away at these, a site starts teetering on the brink of being not eligible. And once it's not eligible, it doesn't require any protections. Often the Forest Service, even if we have ineligible sites, we manage to protect those as much as we can. But if something happens, we don't have to. And sometimes if we get an ineligible call, it's to remove a site. Maybe we just want to clean it up and get it off the landscape and restore the environmental resources. So I mentioned the first of Jim Thompson's wagon roads that went up the bottom of the creek. Well, it's pretty much washed away. So we know the location, we still got that. We might be able to guess at the design, but there's not much left to tell us about that. The setting is still there, that's pretty good. The materials he used are gone. We can't see the workmanship. Feeling and association. By the fact that it's been pretty much wiped off the face of the earth, we've lost so many pieces of this integrity puzzle that it's no longer eligible. And at the end, I'll show you a map of all the historic sites in Oak Creek Canyon that we have recorded. There's lots that are out there that we don't have recorded, which is part of why SHPO is nervous about this. A lot of them have previously been determined ineligible because they were torn down in the past, and there's so little of them remains that there's not a lot of archaeological value left there. So this is kind of a backdrop to getting us where we are today. As you know, Oak Creek Watershed Council put in for a grant. The recent round of that included building the toilet and Midgley Bridge. And so as an archaeologist, I quickly thought, oh, ground disturbing activity, we need to go do a survey, do a clearance. That fits well inside my box of ground disturbing activities. That was kind of interesting because it's in one of the reroutes of J.J. Thompson's road, but it was a later reroute, wasn't really important. Mostly it was a bypass while they were building Midgley Bridge. Wasn't significant, and so it was determined ineligible, and we're trying to put the toilet in. And I didn't even think about the fact that part of this was the cleanup effort. And one of the folks down at SHPO, it hit her red flag that, hey, if folks are out picking up trash, they could be picking up historic sites. And it may sound ridiculous, but I've had a number of sites picked up and cleaned up with the best of intentions. I was on a fire and had a crew out of California, and they were just proud as punch because I showed up and they said, hey, we cleaned up all this trash, and they had like 14 bags of trash. Well, it was a historic homestead. And they almost killed me when I told them they had to empty their bags and spread it all back out. I mean, really, they were really upset. Down in Fossil Creek, we had a site that's been picked up by Boy Scouts and other volunteers so many times that it's basically gone. And another site, an Apache site, we had just found it had been camped on 1 million times, and the cans were smashed paper thin. But when I realized what it was, I realized the whole site was intact. It was all there. It was just smashed flat. And so for an archaeologist, that's fine. I mean, people recoil, but a whole prehistoric pot, to an archaeologist, you can drop the pot on the floor and put it all in a very tiny box. 90% of that information for an archaeologist is still there. So that site, that can, the camp, was still there. I had 90% of the information. And in a couple weeks between showing one forest archaeologist for the Tonto, and then I took the Coconino forest archaeologist down, somebody had cleaned it up entirely. And it looks great, but the entire site got bagged and taken away. So it happens. And so that's why we're here today, talking about what's good to pick up, what's bad to pick up, and where is the question area, and just be safe